Kia ora koutou, na mihi nui ki koutou katoa, ko Glen Rowe toko ingoa. A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Glen Rowe, and it is my pleasure to introduce the last in this series of live presentations for the 2020 RASNZ online conference. Our first presentation in this session is by Emeritus Professor John Hearnshaw. John has been active in the protection of the night sky from encroaching outdoor lighting for many years and was one of the leaders in the establishment of the Aoraki Mackenzie International Dark Sky Reserve, centred around Lake Tekapo. Therefore, John is well qualified to report on New Zealand's progress towards becoming a dark sky nation. If you have any questions for John, please use the chat function and we'll put your questions to him at the end of his presentation. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Glenn, for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about New Zealand's progress towards becoming a dark sky nation, and we'll discuss what that might mean. So at the present time, I think we can say there are four great environmental challenges facing humanity, and several of them will be very familiar to you. Of course, we have the environmental challenge of greenhouse gases and the associated global warming, the greenhouse gases being carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. So that's one big environmental challenge which the Earth is now facing. Another one you will all also be very familiar with is the problem of plastics, especially in the oceans, and especially microplastic particles which are ingested by fish and by marine mammals. That's another big environmental problem. And then we have air pollution in the megacities, mainly, I might say, in the northern hemisphere, not so much in New Zealand, especially from car exhaust and industrial smoke and dust particles. And some of the big cities of especially Asia are highly polluted, and visibility can be reduced to just 100 meters or so in the worst days. But then the fourth big environmental challenge is perhaps the most serious. You might be surprised I'm saying that, but that is the problem of light pollution, and arising from ALAN, which is artificial light at night. And in some ways, I think light pollution is the most serious because it is causing severe dangers for human health and the environment right now. And it's also dangerous because many people are blissfully unaware that this problem even exists. And there's a pity because of these four big environmental challenges. I think light pollution in principle is the easiest to solve, but people have to be educated and know we have a problem before they're willing to adapt to solve it. So that is part of the problem, lack of education and people not being aware that light pollution is causing huge problems for human health and the environment. And even people are dying from ALAN right now. I want to start off with a little bit of history, and going back to the 1950s, in fact, and Flagstaff in Arizona was the first city in the world to have a lighting ordinance to try and reduce the amount of artificial light at night. And Flagstaff was followed by Tucson in southern Arizona in 1972. And these two places are cities with several astronomical observatories. Flagstaff, of course, has the Lowell Observatory, and also US Naval Observatory is near there, and the former Perkins Observatory also in Flagstaff. Tucson has four major observatories: Mount Lemmon, Mount Hopkins, Kip Peak, and a little bit further away, Mount Graham. So that's why these places in Arizona started having lighting ordinances to limit the amount of artificial light at night. And the International Astronomical Union, or IAU, is divided into a number of commissions. And what used to be called Commission 50, today it's called Commission B7, but it's still the same thing. Commission 50 in 1977 published quite an influential report on the protection of existing and potential observatory sites. And the UK astronomer Francis Graham Smith was the author of that 1977 report. It was followed just a few years later in 1980 by the IAU and CIE, that's the International Commission on Illumination, based in Vienna. The IAU-CIE report number 1, in fact, of 1980, was published by Roger Querel in France and several other authors, with the title Guidelines for Minimizing Urban Sky Glow Near Astronomical Observatories. And they identified the problem. This diagram, in fact, comes from that 1980 report, showing that if you have a city and a nearby observatory, even if the observatory is shielded by a hill from the direct lights of the city, but even still, light from the city's street lights can be scattered into the field of view of a telescope looking out into outer space. And that shows the light paths of typical photons. If you look at the light path labeled S, it's scattered somewhere along the light path, scattered then into the telescope beam, and a second scattering will bring that photon into the telescope itself. So that is scattered light, which is added to the light coming from distant astronomical sources in the sky. And that is the problem of light pollution. So that diagram nicely explains why ALAN is a problem for astronomical observations. Here's a little bit more history. In 1981, I was talking to the Mackenzie District Council, and Mount John Observatory, which is owned by University of Canterbury, of course, is in Mackenzie District near Lake Tekapo. And so I was discussing with the Mackenzie District Council about the need for a lighting ordinance to protect the astronomical work at Mount John. And I said, well, you should have a lighting ordinance, and Tucson have got one. Let's base the Mackenzie District's lighting ordinance on the Tucson one, even though the population of Tucson is vastly greater and they have far more light pollution. So we adapted it a little bit for the local circumstances, and that lighting ordinance came in 1981. And that was, I believe, the first lighting ordinance to protect the night sky for astronomy introduced in the Southern Hemisphere. So a little bit later, still in the 1980s though, Dave Crawford, who was an astronomer at Kip Peak National Observatory near Tucson, and Tim Hunter, who is an amateur astronomer. They're both still alive, by the way. But they founded the International Dark Sky Association starting in 1987. So that organization, IDA as it's called, has been instrumental in producing guidelines for abating light pollution. Another organization was founded in Spain by Cipriano Marin in 2009. It's called the Starlight Foundation. That's based in Tenerife in the Canary Islands, and it has strong links with UNESCO and with the UN World Tourist Organization, UNWTO. And they had an important conference on light pollution in 2009 in the Canary Islands. And that's where there was the proclamation of the so-called Starlight Declaration, which proclaims the right of every human being to be able to see a starry night sky without light pollution. Sadly, the world today is far from being in that situation where we are able to see unpolluted night skies. So the Starlight Foundation has many of the same sorts of functions as the International Dark Sky Association, and its focus so far has been mainly on the Spanish-speaking countries in Europe and Latin America. but they are reaching out to the whole world, in fact. So there are a number of starlight reserves around the world which they have given accreditation to. I think in the last 20 years, there's been actually a huge, very significant shift of emphasis, although astronomers were the first people to say that light pollution is a problem. In the last 20 years, people are now trying to promote dark skies for several other reasons. One of them is astrotourism, people who want to see the stars, but they're not research astronomers. They just like to admire the beauty of the night sky. So astrotourism has become a strong movement around the world in the last 20 years. But also, promoting dark skies is good to protect the environment and also to promote human health. And I think that's really important because everyone is interested in human health. Not everyone is interested in stargazing or looking at the stars, and therefore this realization that light pollution is bad for human health, and I'll be discussing that in more detail soon, the realization that human health is affected by light pollution means there's been a strong shift in emphasis towards these other aspects of the adverse effects of light pollution. And then there's the ability of people to save money by using less light and using light more efficiently and only shining outdoor lights on places where the light is really needed and when it's needed. So we can make significant savings in power costs by using less light and therefore having less light pollution. Well, in 2012, we founded the Aoraki Mackenzie International Dark Sky Reserve with IDA accreditation. And but even before that, astrotourism had a major launch in the Mackenzie district at Tekapo with the founding of Earth and Sky, an astrotourism company founded by Graham Murray and Hide Ozawa. And there were actually some earlier stargazing ventures in Tekapo, even before 2004 in the early 1990s. But Earth and Sky has grown into a very large company. It's now been renamed the Dark Sky Project, but it's still the same company, Earth and Sky, founded in 2004. So that has really changed the sort of observatory that Mount John is. It's not just a purely research observatory anymore. It's a hybrid observatory, if you like, both for astrotourism and for astronomical research. And the Aoraki Mackenzie International Dark Sky Reserve was the first dark sky place in New Zealand, and it's stayed in the last 8 years in the forefront of international efforts to protect the night sky and to promote astrotourism. And I think it's acquired a significant international reputation because of those efforts. So here's an Earth and Sky astrotourism tour at Mount John Observatory. This was taken in April 2007, and there's a nice view of the Milky Way and of a small telescope which Earth and Sky have placed on Mount John, together with the University of Canterbury's research telescopes. And this Church of the Good Shepherd at Tekapo, very close to Mount John and on the lake shore, has become, I would say, a symbol of the International Dark Sky Reserve at Tekapo. And there is a picture of the church with the Milky Way in the background, and the Southern Cross and the pointers, which you can see. And of course, that star there is Alpha Centauri, there's Beta, and here's the Southern Cross. And the jewel box cluster is, I should be able to identify it. I know it's very close to Beta, so I think it must be about there. I think that might be the jewel box that looks just like a star. So in a lot of our promotion work, we use this image by Fraser Gunn of the night sky at Tekapo. So the Aoraki Mackenzie International Dark Sky Reserve covers a very large area of Mackenzie District, 4,367 square kilometres, recognised, as I say, in 2012, the first dark sky reserve in the Southern Hemisphere, and the IDA gave it gold tier status because we ticked all the boxes. We had astrotourism already in place, we had an astronomical observatory, and we had a lighting ordinance. So those factors meant we were well established, and it was an easy matter for us to get recognition from IDA. Well, I say an easy matter. We had to write a 180-page book as the application document. So the reserve has had a profound effect on the Mackenzie District tourism. There are about 1.5 million people. This was until the end of 2019, not this year, sadly. 1.5 million people, tourists, travelling along State Highway 8 through the Mackenzie District. And we estimate perhaps 10% go explicitly to see the night skies, about 150,000 astrotourists per year at the end of 2019. And you can see there the numbers over 5 years from 2014 to 19. The number of guest nights is plotted from about 500,000 to almost 1 million per year. So not quite doubling in 5 years. So that's been an economic boon for the Mackenzie District. This plot is perhaps even more dramatic. This is the visitor spend in the Mackenzie District. And for several years before the reserve was created, it was about 120 million New Zealand dollars per year. But when the reserve was created in 2012, it suddenly jumped and has grown exponentially through to 2019, when it was about $360 million per year, or $1 million per day on average. So that's a threefold increase during the 8-year lifetime of the reserve. Of course, this year with COVID, the numbers are way down, but hopefully it will recover as soon as we are over the pandemic. Well, the good news is that New Zealand now has 4 dark sky places. IDA has different categories of dark sky place. Reserves, sanctuaries, communities, and parks are 4 different categories, slightly different criteria in each case. Aoraki Mackenzie was the first in 2012, then Aotearoa, Great Barrier Island, became a dark sky sanctuary with IDA recognition in 2017. Rakiura, Stewart Island, I may have the year wrong there. I just thought I put 2017. It might have been 2018, but never mind. So that is another dark sky sanctuary. And then just this year, we've got Waiti Dark Sky Park near Nelson, founded this year. So 4 dark sky places, that's going pretty good. And I think getting dark sky accreditation in this country has suddenly become very popular. That certainly will not be all, because we have a number of aspiring dark sky places in New Zealand, at least 15 more aspiring places, and here is just a list of where these places are. I've listed here 4, which I think are in a fairly mature state. They're talking to IDA, and they could well get accreditation next year. Naseby, small town in central Otago, could be a dark sky community. Waiheke Island is talking about becoming a dark sky park in the eastern part of the island, and a dark sky community where the people are in the western part. So Nalani Brito and her husband Gareth are the promoters of that concept. The Kua Otunu Peninsula and Orpito Bay in the Coromandel. Alistair Brickell is already running dark sky tours there. and he could well become a dark sky place next year. And I know that in the Wairarapa, Tom Love and his colleagues are working to have a dark sky reserve there. So there are 4 places which, in my assessment, are in a fairly mature state and could well add to the 4 we already have accredited in this country. But that's not all. I know there are more places with aspiring to be dark sky places with IDA recognition. Kairasavia is hoping to have accreditation for various communities north of Dunedin and on the Otago Peninsula. In the far north, North Hokianga is interested in abating light pollution. James Moffat at the Oxford Observatory and the school there is very interested in light pollution abatement. We just started having discussions about the possibility of Kaikoura being a dark sky community, and Steve Butler and I were talking to Will Doughty, Daniel Murray, and Larry Field. Larry Field is an amateur astronomer in Kaikoura, and Rebecca Greatrex, who, by the way, is on the Aoraki Mackenzie International Dark Sky Reserve Board, and is the founder of the concept of the Starlight Highway running through Mackenzie District. She is now talking about having some kind of dark sky place in Geraldine in South Canterbury. Other places in New Zealand perhaps not aspiring to IDA accreditation. Perhaps they are. I don't want to speak for them, but I know they're interested in light pollution abatement. Oamaru, Selwyn districts, I've been talking to the council there. In Wellington, I know Haritina is interested in light pollution abatement. I've just been with Nalani Brito to the Chatham Islands week before last, and we had a wonderful time there and met some of the Chatham Islanders who wish to promote a dark sky place. Monique Kroon in particular is the mayor, and I think she became very interested. I gave a talk in the Marae on the Chathams, and so I think they're in the early stages, but at least they're interested. Ricky Clarkson and Wainui Yamata and the Rongorongo Valley, just out of Wellington, is interested. Amy Young is talking about a dark sky place in Fiordland National Park. Marianne Judd at Raitihi near Ohakuni. And I was trying to get the Christchurch City Council interested in the Christchurch Red Zone, which was where a lot of houses were demolished. So it's one great big park running along the Avon River from central city to the sea. That's the Christchurch Red Zone, and it's going to be used for recreation rather than residential housing. I've tried to get the Christchurch City Council interested in good lighting in that park. Haven't had a lot of traction from the council, or at least I've been trying. So, is New Zealand on track to become a dark sky nation? Well, that concept has actually never been defined, so we don't actually know what a dark sky nation means. At 2018 RASNZ conference, John Barratine from IDA came and gave a talk, and he used this term. He said, I think New Zealand is on track to becoming the world's first dark sky nation, without actually telling us what that means. When I looked at the IDA website, I found there was an Indian reservation in Arizona, the Kaibab Paiute reservation, which they call a dark sky nation. But I think that's a different meaning of the term dark sky nation. Some people have described Niue, which recently became a dark sky place with IDA accreditation, as a dark sky nation. Of course, Niue is a very small island state in free association with New Zealand. Yes, it is a dark sky nation in one sense, but it's not fully independent. So I think New Zealand could still become the first dark sky nation, but the Niueans may contest that. So what does a dark sky nation mean? I think it can mean anything we want it to mean, because IDA has not really defined the term, nor has anyone else. in my view, if we can get, say, a dozen dark sky places with IDA accreditation in New Zealand, then we can fairly claim to be a leading place for dark sky places and effectively a dark sky nation. So that's what I hope we can do, about a dozen places. And I think we're on track. In the next, say, 5 years, we will get there. So that's an interesting challenge. Let's see what happens. I want to discuss now how ALAN, artificial light at night, can harm the environment. And it's actually a surprising multiplicity of ways that ALAN can affect both plants and animals. Many animals, especially insects, for example, have increased predation. If there is artificial light at night, they become more vulnerable to be prey. And another effect is a reduced reproduction rate. So species gradually dies out. And habitats may become unlivable because there are too many animals preying on certain species. Another effect of artificial light at night is birds sometimes migrate by astronavigation. And if they can't see the stars because the sky is too bright, they get confused about where they should be flying to. So astronavigation is affected. And quite apart from birds migrating, species can get disorientated if there is light pollution at night. And one well-known example is the baby turtle hatchlings on the seashore. When there's light pollution inland, they mistake that for moonlight shining off the waves, and they go in the wrong direction. Baby turtles have to go into the sea, but if they get disorientated, they don't go towards the sea, and that means eventually they die, or they are gobbled up by perhaps seabirds. Plants are also affected by light pollution, and tree leaf necrosis means leaves die, and this is primarily because the little pores in tree leaves called stomata, through which leaves breathe, they give out oxygen and absorb carbon dioxide during the day. At night, those stomata should close, but if there's too much light pollution, they stay open, and that causes leaf stress and eventually leaf death or necrosis. And also, plants lose their sense of what time of year it is, so they lose seasonal photoperiodism, and that means that certain crucial stages in seasonal life of a tree, such as budding in spring and leaf loss of deciduous trees in the autumn, take place at the wrong time, and that causes serious harmful effects for trees as well. So the answer is that just about every species which has evolved on this planet, both plants and animals, which has evolved in alternating day and night, of light and dark, just about every species is adversely affected by artificial light at night. And many species are being driven into extinction. I particularly want to mention the effect of light pollution on birds. And if you look at the top left diagram, that's a forest at dusk. And birds navigate flying between the trees by flying towards the lighter patches. And if we're now in an urban environment and we have an office block with lights left on at night, very often that happens because offices are cleaned at night, so the lights stay on. The birds fly into those windows and are concussed, and they dropped dead to the ground. So it's estimated that in North America, full of office skyscrapers, there are about 100 million bird fatalities per year. That's really a shocking figure. But also, outdoor lights attract insects, and insectivorous birds are attracted around lamps, and so insects get gobbled up, and that's bad for the insects, of course, but also birds clustering around those searchlights, which you see in the bottom picture, can easily have collisions, so birds can collide with each other, and that's bad also for the birds. So what we need is lighting curfews and perhaps more red or amber lights rather than white ones, which have a less harmful effect on the environment. Well, I think the human health impact of artificial light at night has been become very much noticed in the last 2 decades, and artificial light at night causes a whole range of adverse effects on human health. And here's a list: obesity, diabetes, depression, lack of good circadian rhythm, eye damage, cancer, especially breast and prostate cancers, heart disease, and sleep disorders. So that's a fairly long and serious list. And I think this now is the main reason why people have become very concerned about artificial light at night. And it's not anymore primarily a movement driven by astronomers. It's driven by the fact that everyone is interested in good health, and people living in cities do not want to suffer these bad consequences of artificial light at night. But then there's the economic benefit, because we're wasting a lot of energy. It's estimated that for the older style, mainly high-pressure sodium streetlights, probably about 35% of the light was wasted because it was going up into the sky and not down to where it's needed. That means that 35% of the electricity costs are also wasted. In the United States, that equates to $3 billion per year. And that's, of course, a very serious waste of money. Worldwide, the figure must be at least 10 times that of the United States, so at least $30 billion. So let's say about 50 billion Kiwi dollars per year is wasted because of poorly installed streetlights. I think the situation is getting better with properly shielded lights, but that's going to take time before we really bring that figure down significantly. Well, as you probably know, many streetlights are being converted to light-emitting diode streetlights, or LEDs, and the typical distribution of light in the spectrum of an LED is shown at the top. Typical LED at 4,000 Kelvin color temperature has a strong blue peak at about 450 nanometers, caused by gallium nitride or indium-doped gallium nitride in the blue. And in addition, there's a broad green to yellow to red band of emission, which is actually the more useful light emitted from an LED. It's that blue peak which is so disconcerting. Now, a little bit of human physiology. In the human eye, there are 3 types of light-sensitive cell in the retina. The cones are used for daytime vision, called photopic vision. And that red curve there, centered at about 555 nanometers in the yellow, is the sensitivity of the cones. Then the rods are used for nighttime or scotopic vision. That's the green curve, centered at about 505 nanometers. But then the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells are also in the retina, and they're sensitive in the blue at about 470 nanometers. And those wavelength scales on those 2 diagrams I've lined up, so you can see that the blue peak from LEDs coincides very closely with the maximum sensitivity of the retinal ganglion cells. And by the way, those ganglion cells were only discovered in 2005, and the fact that they have such a profound effect on the production of hormones, especially of melatonin, in the human body. And the hormones such as melatonin are only produced at night in the absence of blue light. Therefore, it's critically important that everyone goes to sleep in a bedroom where an LED street light is not trespassing in through the bedroom window. Otherwise, your melatonin will be suppressed, and melatonin suppression is really the cause of all those health adverse effects which I just mentioned. This is how it works. Blue light at night enters the eye. The back of the eye is the retina with these 3 different types of cell, including the ganglion cells. The ganglion cells are not used for vision at all, but they, when they receive blue light, send a signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or labeled there as SCN, a little body right in the middle of the brain. That is the master control clock of the human body, and it controls all the bodily functions, and it has a natural circadian rhythm of about 24 hours, but the circadian rhythm of the human body is entrained by the alternating blue light during the day and darkness at night. So we need that 24-hour bright, dark cycle to keep the suprachiasmatic nucleus in step with what the sun is doing. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus sends a signal to various glands, including the pineal gland, also deep inside the brain, which is where the melatonin is produced. So blue light at night sends this signal to the pineal gland, which suppresses melatonin production, and the melatonin doesn't, therefore, is not secreted at night. And then normally, if you sleep in darkness, the melatonin will flow throughout the body in the bloodstream, and this keeps you healthy. And if you lack melatonin, you have the first symptoms of feeling very tired and jet lagged, but the more serious symptoms of depression and even cancer. Melatonin acts to trigger cells in the blood called T cells, which can fight prostate and breast cancer. So what we know is that people who work during the day and work at night and sleep during the day, they often sleep with blue skylight coming in through the bedroom windows. They're very melatonin deficient, and those shift workers who are sleeping during the day have significantly higher cancer rates, about 35% higher. So it's a very marked effect. So I'm not saying that blue light is bad for you. Blue light is good for you during the day, and other hormones are just produced during the day by blue light. So when you wake up in the morning, you should have blue light shining in from the sky, and hormones such as serotonin and cortisol and dopamine. Serotonin and dopamine put you in a good mood and make you feel optimistic and happy and ready for the day. So blue light is very beneficial, but only at the right time of day. Now I want to change subject a little bit. I want to talk about measuring night sky brightness. A lot of people measure night sky brightness just by seeing how faint are the stars just visible to the naked eye. And of course, on a really dark night, you can see down to magnitude 6 or perhaps 6.5. And sometimes we use the Bortle scale, which is largely based on limiting magnitude. Bortle and class 1 as the very darkest skies. The most light polluted skies are called Bortle class 9. So if you live in a city, probably you're a Bortle class 7 in New Zealand, but in big cities in the Northern Hemisphere, it's probably 8 or 9. Number of stars visible is another way of measuring night sky brightness, but it'd be a bit arduous to count 3,500 stars on a clear night, which is the number you can see in a hemisphere. Most often people are, at least astronomers, are measuring sky darkness with a measure called the visual magnitudes per square arc second, and 22.0 is about as dark as it gets. And that measure comes from the natural air glow if there's no light pollution. So the atmosphere is radiating, and there is a natural brightness to the night sky. That's the air glow. And the commonly used sky quality meters measure in visual magnitudes per square arc second. It's not quite the same as the Johnson visual magnitude system used by astronomers, but it's close to it. It's got a rather broader bandpass. Perhaps more convenient is the S10 unit, is equivalent number of 10th magnitude stars per square arc minute. The S10 unit has the benefit that the brighter the night sky, the more S10 units there are, whereas visual magnitudes per square arc second is an inverse logarithmic scale, so the brighter the night sky, the smaller the number. And that can be a bit confusing unless you're used to visual magnitude system used by astronomers. Sometimes people say measure the number of night sky units, and one NSU is the natural air glow. So if you had two NSUs, that would be as much light from artificial light pollution as from the natural air glow. But really, the unit we should be all using is the SI unit, the International System Unit, which is the unit of photometric luminance or surface brightness of the night sky, and that's candela per square meter, or lumens per steradian per square meter, if you like. And that is a unit based on the photopic visual passband defined by the International Commission for Illumination, CIE, and centered at 555 nanometers. So that is really the correct unit for measuring night sky brightness. And it's fairly easy to convert from visual magnitudes per square arc second to this photometric luminance of the night sky. So down the bottom there, I've got a note, just because it's a bit confusing with all these different ways of measuring it. Night sky units, one night sky unit is completely no artificial light at night, no light pollution. That corresponds to approximately 250 microcandela per square meter. But the amount of natural air glow is somewhat variable in time and place. And that also corresponds to about 145 S10 units, or about 22 magnitudes per square arc second, and to Bortle class 1. I forgot to put 1 at the end of that line. This well-known nomogram by the Dutch astronomer Henk Spoelstra shows the different ways. This first column is the night sky units, then magnitudes per square arc second, so completely unpolluted dark is this red line. Millicandela per square meter is here, so about 250 microcandela per square meter is complete absence of light pollution. There's the Bortle scale from 1 to 9. Visibility of the Milky Way, well, this is the limiting magnitude, about 6.5 or a bit fainter, if there's no light pollution, and the number of stars in a hemisphere in that last column. So everyone at present is really measuring sky brightness in the photopic visual band at 555 nanometers. But what we should really also do is measure the scotopic band centered at 505 nanometers in the green, because if you're a stargazer and your eyes are fully dark adapted, your sensitivity is actually centered at 505 nanometers. So if you want to know the effect of light pollution on stargazing, it would be useful to know the sky brightness in the scotopic band in the green. Also, if you want to know the effect of light pollution on human health and the environment, you really ought to measure in the blue. And this is called the melanopsin, which is the pigment in the ganglion cells, which is sensitive to blue light. So the melanopsin band is centered at about 475 nanometers, and that would be relevant for gauging the effect of light pollution on human health and hormone disruption in the human body. So I'm advocating that we should actually be measuring these three bands and not just in the photopic visual band, which is not really used by dark adapted people at all. So many lighting manufacturers would note, do specify the scotopic to photopic ratio of their light sources, which is the relative amount of blue to yellow visual light. Finally, I want to mention that I've spent this year of COVID and lockdown by writing 4 books or chapters of books or reports in this year. I just want to mention what these are because they're all about to be published. The IAU and the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs and the Institute of Astrophysics of the Canaries have produced reports on dark and, well, it's actually, they had a conference which was online in October on dark and quiet skies, and they're writing a report which will be published probably in about a week, and it will be on the IAU websites. And this report's going to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, a UN committee, COPUOS. And a lot of people have written this report. Connie Walker in the US, Piero Benvenuti in Italy, myself, James Lobenthal in the US, Richard Green and Harvey List, also Americans. And we all had a certain number of working groups, with about a dozen people in each working group, working on this massive report on light pollution. The emphasis has been very much on astronomy and the effects of light pollution on observational astronomy. And it covers not only optical astronomy, also radio astronomy, so they're interested in quiet skies. And it's also covered the satellite constellations that SpaceX have been launching, which affects astronomers working from the ground. I've also written a chapter for a book to be published very soon by Springer next year. And the chapter I wrote, the book is Risk Management in Outer Space. The chapter I wrote, chapter 7 of this book, is Light Pollution as a Risk for Astronomical Research and How to Manage It. So it's about 40 pages in that chapter 7. And then IUCN is the International Commission for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. They have a Dark Skies Advisory Group, and I'm a member of that group. And the group has written a book called Best Practices and Guidelines for Nature Conservation in Natural and Urban Areas. And this is being peer-reviewed now. The writing of the book is finished. It's being peer-reviewed and will be published early next year. And the emphasis of this is very much on nature conservation. So all these 3 books or documents have a slightly different emphasis. The first one was astronomy, the next one space law, this one on nature conservation. Also, I have written most of a book which I've called the New Zealand Dark Skies Handbook, which, I've been so busy this year, haven't been able to finish it, but I hope to finish at least in time for the RASNZ Centenary Conference next year, whenever that might be. So I still got a few months of work to do to finish it, but it covers the concept of a dark sky nation, good lighting practices, human health issues, endocrinology, which is the hormone production in the human body, environmental issues, lighting, safety, astronomy and stargazing. So I hope to have that probably self-published sometime in the new year. And just quickly go through the chapter contents. Chapter 1, why protect dark skies? Chapter 2, good lighting practices. Chapter 3 is on measuring light. Chapter 4 is on the eye and human vision, and also hormones and melatonin. Chapter 5, lighting ordinances and dark sky organizations. There are many dark sky organizations at a national level around the world, in addition to IDA and the Starlight Foundation. So that's chapter 5. Chapter 6, dark sky places in New Zealand. And I've mentioned most of those in my talk so far. I've got chapter 7 on island dark sky places, not just in New Zealand, but overseas as well. And islands are often very isolated and consequently dark. And chapter 8 is on astrotourism and stargazing. So that's just a brief summary of the book, which I hope will be available next year. So that's the end of my talk. There's a nice picture taken on Great Barrier Island, taken by Mark Russell. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I've gone a little bit over time. Have I, Glenn?
Yes, just a little bit, John.
Sorry about that.
But there was, so much good content in there. Great to hear it from you. Steve, have there been any questions come in while John's been talking?
No questions. Everybody must have had all their questions answered by that great presentation.
Okay.
Perhaps that's because no one was actually listening.
I'm sure they were.
Oh, there are certainly people listening.
Ah, that's good to know.
Right. Well, we will move on to the next talk, and so people will be able to put any questions into the chat for the next little while. So our second speaker this evening is John Drummond. John's talk is about Murray Geddes, who was an accomplished observer, the first director of Carter Observatory, and is honoured by the RASNZ with the Murray Geddes Memorial Prize. Again, if you have any questions for this John, please use the chat function and we'll put the questions to him at the end of his presentation. And the same goes for any questions that come to mind on John Hearnshaw's talk. So over to you, JD.
Okay. So yeah, thanks for this. This is a talk about Murray Geddes. So Murray Geddes was he's in around the country and internationally. So, like Glenn said just before, we honour Murray Geddes by presenting the Murray Geddes Memorial Prize, which is in our rules and bylaws, which basically says it's a prize for contributions to astronomy in New Zealand. And there's some photos of the actual medal that we hand out during the Saturday night banquet at the conference, on our annual conference. And thanks to Steve Butler for sharing those. And here's one that Anthony Gomez took a photo of and shared with me. Basically, Anthony won the 2019 Murray Geddes Award. So that's what it looks like. It's a very nice medal for a fantastic astronomer's memory. Okay, so who was this New Zealand astronomer and how did he contribute to astronomy? Well, as we'll see, he was an assiduous observer of meteors, sunspots and variable stars, and that's from his obituary by Ivan Thompson. In addition, he observed aurora and discovered a comet, one of only 6 New Zealanders to do so in New Zealand's history. And he was the first director of Wellington's Carter Observatory. So the key points for tonight is that he was New Zealand educated. He became interested in astronomy as a school teacher. He was, as Geddes said, Ivan Thompson said, he was an assiduous, very committed observer of meteors, sunspots and variable stars. He was active in the study of aurora that led to a professional and amateur collaboration. Discovered a comet. He was the president of the New Zealand Astronomical Society. Later, it would be called the Royal Astronomical Society of New Zealand. As we know, that's where we're having these online meetings as part of the RASNZ. And he was appointed as the first director of Carter Observatory. Now, because of his keen mind, he was used for radar work in World War II when he volunteered, and sadly he died when he was on active duty at the young age of 35. Now, some of this is taken from a journal article in Southern Stars by Norm Dickey back in down here, I think, let's see if you can see my mouse, in June of 2010, and also thanks to Norm's son Ross for sending me some more information and photos. Just by the by, this is a presentation that's part of my PhD that I'm doing in the history of New Zealand's involvement in the study of comets over the years, and as part of the University of Southern Queensland. My supervisors being Dr. Caroline Brown and Professor Wayne Orchiston. So Murray Geddes, his formative years, he was born 1 year before Halley's Comet came in 1910. He was educated in New Plymouth. He studied at the Dunedin Teachers Training College, then went to Otago University. He got a Masters of Art in English, and later on, he was quite neat at doing this. He would be working but also doing further studies extramurally. So it just shows how keen his mind was to continue his education. So he got a Master of Arts in Maths in 1938, and he began teaching at New Plymouth's Westtown School. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, if you're from overseas, here's New Plymouth, New Zealand, North Island, South Island. There's New Plymouth there. That's where he was born, educated. Then from there, he went all the way down here to Dunedin to get his studies done, and then went back to New Plymouth to start up school teaching. Here's the photo of his first school that he taught at Westtown School in New Plymouth. Sorry, it's a little bit pixelated. And when he was there, he actually became interested in astronomy. And as a consequence of that, he joined the New Plymouth Astronomical Society. Here's a photo of the Society's observatory. And in 2019, the New Plymouth Astronomical Society celebrated 100 years of longevity as a society. So well done. And at New Plymouth, he became a very keen observer of meteors. He did about 1,500 meteor observations. He observed sunspots, variable stars. And he would have used the New Plymouth Astronomical Society's 6-inch telescope. Here it is here. It's a Alvin Clark telescope. It was made in 1881 and made for the Sydney Observatory to observe the transit of Venus. Then it made its way across the Tasman to New Plymouth to be put in the observatory there. Now, after teaching in New Plymouth for a while, his teaching profession took him to Otakura, down in the South Island. So here's the bottom of New Zealand here, the bottom of the South Island, Stewart Island here, and here's Otakura here. It's about 100 kilometres east of Invercargill. So when he was there, that's a classic photo of his school, so to speak. He had 25 students in about 1934, and in the background, in this pixelated background, there he is there, surrounded by students, and a great location for a school out in the country, away from light pollution, like John Hearnshaw was talking about before. And he set up a telescope down there with a 5-inch Cook refractor, and I believe this is that telescope. After Murray Geddes died, Carter Observatory purchased it and then lent it to the Canterbury Astronomical Society for 12 years and then another 12 years, and they had it housed at West Melton, out in the rural part of Christchurch. And from there, I believe Carter Observatory took it back, and now it's at a Wellington Telescope Museum. So when he was down at the bottom of the South Island, he was actually closer to the auroral oval, and he began to study aurora. Here's a satellite photo taken from space, of course, and it shows Antarctica here with the auroral oval here. And here is where Geddes was, right down there, not far from where the aurora were. So basically, for those who don't know, the further north you go, the less chance you have of seeing aurora, whereas he was really south, almost as south as you can get in New Zealand, almost, and so he saw a lot more aurora. So he became interested in aurora, and that's about the time when he got interested in aurora, when he's in his early, 30s, and at this stage. And for those who don't know what aurora look like, this is what they look like. Basically, in the southern hemisphere, we get aurora australis, beautiful coloured lights where the sun's energy is making the atoms, molecules in the upper atmosphere glow. And this was taken not far from where Geddes lived during that time. This was taken from Bluff by John Burt, my good astronomy friend, in the days of film. So he thrust himself into the study of aurora, and age 23, he was appointed the director of the Auroral and Zodiacal Light section of the New Zealand Astronomical Society. As we know, it later became the Royal Astronomical Society of New Zealand. And based on his interest in aurora, he developed a relationship with Carl Stormer, Professor Carl Stormer of Norway, and they were both interested in aurora and collaborated their observations and photos. There's Carl Stormer there, Professor Stormer, and here's a photo of them supposedly, I guess, during the daytime, supposedly taking a photo of aurora from in the Northern Hemisphere. And Geddes was interested in photography, and as often happens when people are interested in astronomy and photography, they combine the two to become astrophotography. So he would actually photograph aurora from down at the bottom of the South Island and share them with Professor Stormer. And basically, in those days in the 1930s, colour film was starting to be developed, if you'll excuse the pun. And there's a photo of, what film possibly looked like back in those early days. And single lens reflex cameras started to come out in the 1920s and 30s. I went on the internet and just found this photo of a camera, typed in the 1930s SLR camera. That's what it popped out. So possibly this is the sort of equipment that Murray Geddes was using in his photography of aurora. And from this, Geddes and Stormer determined auroral heights, studied the forms of aurora, their phases, frequencies, and other statistics. And from this, their work revealed that the aurora displays in the southern hemisphere were more frequent than formerly believed. Here's some satellite photos of one aurora event happening, and you can see it's actually affecting the northern hemisphere up here, and down here you can be seen in the southern hemisphere here, and here's Antarctica around here. So of course 80% of the world's population lives in the northern hemisphere, and there's a lot of countries in the northern hemisphere, not so many in the southern hemisphere. And so it was believed for a time that with more eyeballs up here in the northern hemisphere, there were more people seeing aurora, and people believe that, aurora were more of a northern hemisphere thing, aurora borealis. But no, thanks to Geddes and his work, it was realised that, hey, the southern hemisphere actually sees as many aurora as the northern hemisphere. It's just there weren't as many eyeballs down this part of the world where it's mostly water in the southern hemisphere. So also their work revealed that the maximum aurora activity lags slightly behind the solar maxima. Solar maxima meaning the maximum number of sunspots. The sun goes through an 11-year cycle, and at times there's hardly any sunspots, other times there's a lot of sunspots, solar maxima, and their work revealed that the auroral activity sort of lags behind the solar maxima when there's a heap of sunspots by a little bit. And in conjunction with Professor White of Canterbury University, they determined that New Zealand's South Island was probably the best landmass outside of Antarctica for the study of aurora. This map here shows, of course, the geographic pole where the South Pole is, basically where the knitting needle goes through the bottom of the Earth. But besides that, there's other poles. The magnetic pole, where your compass will, if you're here, your compass will point south, come around here, your compass will then say south is that way there. If you're directly over the magnetic pole, basically the compass will be pointing straight down. But different to that is the geomagnetic pole, this one here, where that's basically the center of the auroral oval. And so you can see that where Murray Geddes was down here at the bottom of the South Island wasn't far from the geomagnetic pole, and therefore he was able to see a lot of aurora that others couldn't quite see because they're further north. And Geddes actually organised a group of 700 New Zealanders to study aurora, and today there's an aurora radar station at Aurora between Invercargill and Bluff. In fact, 2 months ago, Nalini and Gareth Davis and I went down to Stewart Island to give some talks, some astronomy talks down there to dark sky ambassadors. And we drove past the station, and sorry, it's a little bit pixelated and not the best shot because we were in a moving car. Steve Butler was driving, and you can actually see the radar installation there for studying Aurora, where they're looking at the upper ionosphere of the Earth and also studying it in relation to Aurora and so on. So you can see that this part of the world is very much involved in auroral studies, and it was led early in the piece by Murray Geddes. Now, in 1932, Murray Geddes discovered a comet, and known as Comet 1932 M2, and these are from his notes. Thanks to Ross Dickey for getting me these notes. And basically, this is Geddes' logbook in his own handwriting, where he says on June 22nd, 1932, he was observing. He said the wind was southwest, strong breeze. He swept for comets for 1.25 hours through these southern constellations of Apis, Camellia, Noctans, and so on. And he observed at 7:20 in the evening, he observed a fuzzy object close to the star Zeta Octantis. And he made a sketch of it and kept on going back to it and observing it. And he basically says the movement was now quite definite, and he decided it was a comet. So here's only 6 New Zealanders have discovered comets, excluding Bradfield, who was actually born, William Bradfield, who was born in New Zealand, but he moved to Australia. A lot of newspaper articles came out at that time saying, talking about the discovery, and that it was about 6 degrees from the south celestial pole. And here's Murray Geddes' sketch of the comet here, that little thing that looks like a spider. And here's Zeta Octantis here. Now, just remember these 3 stars here and these 3 stars here. What I did with guide software is I went through and set the time to where the comet matched these 3 stars here. So this time was 22nd of June 1932. I'm not sure if guide and the actual position are exactly right, but nevertheless, it was sort of later in the evening, and that you can see that there's Zeta Octantis, the 3 stars, and those 3 stars there, which matches Geddes' map here of Zeta, the 3 stars, and that little loop of stars there. So Geddes basically became an overnight sensation in New Zealand for discovering a comet. And it basically says in here, this is the Gisborne Times, where I'm from, Gisborne. So this is an old newspaper. It's now known as the Gisborne Herald. But back then it was saying that the comet was about magnitude 10 upon discovery. Now, the comet reached perihelion a few months later. So about 5 months after Murray Geddes discovered it. It was about 7 degrees from the sun. When it reached perihelion, which perihelion meaning the closest point to the sun, and this sketch, diagram is from the JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and you can type in a comet and see the path of different comets. This was Comet Geddes here. You can see it actually came below the ecliptic, Earth and Sun up here, so south is down here, and that's why Geddes actually saw it in the southern hemisphere, not about 6 degrees from the south celestial pole. So it came below Earth, down in the south, came closest to the sun on the 7th of November, and then hooned away into the northern hemisphere. So according to Gary Cronk and his cometography books, it was a very well observed and imaged comet, and it was actually last detected 2 years after it was discovered. It was photographed at magnitude 17.5, and Brian Marsden of the Minor Planet Center in 1973 basically worked out that it possibly has an orbital period of about 3 million years, so quite a long period comet. And for his discovery, Murray Geddes received the Comet Medal from the United States of America and the Donovan Prize and Medal from Australia. So well done, Geddes, for all your observational work. But not only was he involved observationally in astronomy, but he is very involved with astronomical societies. In fact, he was also involved in non-astronomical societies as well. He is heavily involved in the Forest and Bird Society of New Zealand, the Wellington Photographic Club when he moved there, the Tararua Tramping Club, which is not far from Wellington. So he was very much a nature lover in his life. And in 1931, he joined the New Zealand Astronomical Society, today known as RASNZ, and he was the president of that society in 1940, 1941, then vice president from 1942 to 1943, and he was on the RASNZ, or the New Zealand Astronomical Society council, until his death in 1944. These are notes of the meeting where he was elected. Thanks to Jenny McCormick's mum for typing up the old minutes book, and it says here, election of council. The president reported that no nominations had been received from members. Has anything changed? Anyhow, so he was nominated the president. There he is, President Murray Geddes, fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society. So, and he was elected a fellow, as stated, of the society in 1934-5. He was also a member of the British Astronomical Society, the Astronomical Society of France, and the American Meteor Section. In March of 1939, he was appointed Director of Carter Observatory, and the inaugural Director of Carter Observatory, the first one, which is a huge, very large honour to be given to a person, to be appointed director of the observatory. There's the observatory in a photograph. I got this off the internet, photographed in about the 1970s. So this is the observatory that he was director of, and the observatory was actually completed in December 1941, and sadly Murray Geddes left for the war effort probably about 3 months later in 1942, February. Now, when he was at Carter Observatory, he implemented a double-star observing program and also did a number of sketches of Mars that appeared in the magazine Popular Astronomy. And not only was he interested in those things, but he was very interested in the Polynesian Maori star law and navigation. Bit of a legend in that respect, and what the Maori believed for astronomy and how they navigated around the South Seas. Now, finally, Murray Geddes joined the New Zealand Naval Volunteer Reserve, and there's some of the, this is just off the internet, an advert saying, we need your help, basically, a sailor saying we've got a job for you. So Geddes joined it. He joined the war effort. He became a sub-lieutenant and with specialist duties because of his good academic abilities, keen mind. And he left New Zealand in 1942. There he is there as a young man in his naval uniform. And he saw much action when he was doing when he was overseas in his naval career. He was part of the East Indies effort, the Mediterranean, Morocco, Madagascar, and also he was involved with the Normandy landings towards the end of the war, nearly. And he reached the rank of lieutenant commander, and he was very respected for his technical knowledge of radar and also for determining the direction that planes would come in from. This is off the internet, this photo, basically the radar installation during World War II. I believe this is probably near the cliffs of Dover in England. And another photo from the internet of radar operators during World War II trying to determine the direction that German planes were coming from. So sadly for New Zealand and the world, Murray Geddes passed away on the 23rd of July 1944 in Glasgow, aged 35. And as Thompson said in his obituary, it was after a sudden and unexpected illness. Basically, he died of a brain hemorrhage. So tributes flew around the world, especially in New Zealand. There's a lot of newspaper articles celebrating his life and mourning his death. And one sentence in here that I quite like is they talked about his work with the war effort, and the final sentence is, "I can only say he was irreplaceable." And I think that reflects what sort of person he was in the war, but also for astronomy and his dedication to astronomy in New Zealand. I mean, he discovered a comet. He was influential in the study of aurora. He observed sunspots, meteors, variable stars. A wide range of interests did Murray Geddes have in astronomy. And you can see why, in the light of all that Murray Geddes has done for New Zealand and overseas astronomy, why the RASNZ Medal for Services to Astronomy is named after Murray Geddes. So a very deserved honour for a fantastic New Zealand astronomer. So thank you very much, and that's basically it, Glenn. Cheers.
Okay, thanks very much, JD. That was a great review of a great life of a short-lived life of a great man. Okay, Steve, do we have any? So no questions for either Johns? Okay, must be such great talks that they've answered everybody's questions.
Oh, I sent a question on chat. Did you not get that?
Okay. So there is a question from John Hearnshaw. I'll let you read your own question, John.
Okay, so you mentioned Carl Stormer, or Sturmer, as I think it's pronounced in Norway, and you showed a picture of Stormer and Geddes together. So was that taken in Norway or in New Zealand?
No, that photo there was actually, it wasn't Geddes. It was Stormer and an assistant in the Northern Hemisphere photographing the Aurora Borealis.
Oh, I see. I didn't realise.
Stormer was photographing the northern lights, up in the Northern Hemisphere, and Geddes was photographing the southern lights down in the from down near Invercargill, basically.
Right. Okay, I've got it. And by the way, just an anecdote related to Stormer, as he was nominated successfully as an honorary member of the Astronomical Society of New Zealand, and no doubt Murray Geddes was the nominator, and in 1938 he became an honorary member. Oh, just a little interesting fact.
Oh, thank you. Cool.
Okay, thanks for that, John. So I'll check in with you one final time, Steve. Any other questions?
No, we don't have any questions on the YouTube chat.
Okay. So tonight's talks conclude the series of presentations for the 2020 RASNZ online conference. Before drawing this to a close, there are a number of people that must be thanked. Firstly, I'd like to thank Warwick for rounding up our presenters and organising the schedule. Next, I wish to acknowledge all the presenters, firstly for agreeing to be involved and putting in the time and effort to put together and present their talks. Just to go through those people. So firstly, our overseas speakers who kindly allowed the use of existing talks. We heard from Katie Bowman on imaging black holes and René Breton on pulsars and Einstein's relativity. Nick Rattenbury gave two talks, one on the Auckland Space Institute and another on the unsuccessful proposal to establish the Kerr-Tinsley Centre of Research Excellence. Tom Love spoke about spectroscopy with small telescopes. Heloise Devance discussed determining the age of star clusters. And Steve Butler talked about measuring light spill into space. Ed Budding talked about studies of southern close binary systems. Petra Tang from Auckland spoke on estimating spectral density for the stochastic gravitational wave background. And Jan Eldridge talked about understanding the stars that create gravitational wave transients. And Max Briel spoke of observing transients in a simulated universe. And tonight we've just heard John Hearnshaw looking forward to the possibility of a dark sky nation, and John Drummond looking back on the life and achievements of Murray Geddes. And my final special thanks go to Steve, who has been making sure that all of the technology is working as it should to make these live streams happen as seamlessly as possible. I hope you have enjoyed these events and will catch up with any that you may have missed, as they will remain available on the RASNZ YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our channel. With that, I will now bring our online conference talk sessions to a close. Ka kite anō.